WINSTROL. This is entertainment purposes only. Although I'm a medical doctor, I'm not your doctor. And this isn't medical advice. Steroids are bad. They shouldn't be done. And if you're watching this and you're not a doctor, you shouldn't be self-prescribing medications. In fact, even doctors aren't supposed to self-prescribe medications. But in Michigan, blowjobs are illegal. So there's lots of silly laws, but some of these laws make sense. Like, if you saw the questions I got, you'd understand that some people are not smart enough to use steroids at all. It's the most complicated form of medicine. It's not dangerous unless in a really stupid person's hands. Forks aren't dangerous, but they still put corks on them and when they give them to retards. And there's a reason for that. My client and buddy Andreas's company, I'm sure he'll comment in the comment section with the directions. I would assume you would use Google. I know, don't break a nail. I know it's so hard to use Google when you could just ask people questions, but Google aesthetics. So if I was smart, which I am, what I do is I would pause it and then I would open Google and then I would look, type it in, go back, look, make sure I spelled it right. It's how I do everything. I don't have a mommy and daddy to wipe my ass for me and ask questions. I have to look things up myself. So, that being said, WINSTROL, Stanozol. I always mispronounce that, so make fun of me all you want. I've got my blocking shoes on. So, WINSTROL. It's a really strange structure. Instead of double bond oxygen, or ketone group it's called, at position 3, which normally gets converted to an hydroxyl group or an alcohol group or OH, and that makes it estrogen. You've got a amide ring, which is basically nitrogens mixed into a 5-member ring. It's the strangest structure of all the anabolic steroids. And it has a special feature that no other anabolic steroid does. Because it's a DHT molecule, it does the same thing the other DHT molecules do. You know, binds to the aromatase enzyme and deactivates it. You know, the most research and the best of the DHTs, as we've proven so far, is Anavar. It's just people don't use a lot of it, so they compare 20 milligrams of Anavar to 150 Anadrol, and they say it doesn't work. Well, WINSTROL's special feature is instead of binding to the cortisol receptor, like most DHT molecules, it actually binds to the cortisol binding proteins and binds at the adrenal gland and prevents cortisol from being released. So like a lot of the orals that are DHT, it doesn't really bind to the androgen receptor. It functions in other ways. So most of the DHT family functions by inhibiting aromatase, thus making there being less estrogen. And since estrogen is relatively bad for getting cut or being dry, because estrogen increases water retention, increases fat accumulation, decreases a bunch of other stuff. All estrogen's really good for is HDL and joint security. Well, this is extra bad for your joints because without cortisol being released, your joints start to hurt. So a lot of people don't see any value to it. Its value is it's one of the driest compounds you can use, So right before you get on stage, maybe a couple weeks before the show, whatever orals you were running, which would probably be Anavar since that's the relatively driest one, you would switch to WINSTROL. So if D-ball's the wettest, gives you the best pump, but gives you gyno. Anadrol might give you gyno, but still gives you a good pump because they both shut down 11D beta hydroxylase, so you hold water in and outside of the muscle. Supposedly, Superdrol does it more in the muscle than Anadrol, and whatever. Estrogen. So the D-ball special feature is that it converts to a really strong estrogen and shuts down 11 beta hydroxylase. Anadrol just shuts down 11 beta hydroxylase. You store water in the muscle, outside of the muscle. Superdrol somehow manages to make it more in the muscle, water retention. But these is just water changes. That Anavar is the best of all the worlds because it's the most anabolic, least androgenic, relatively good binding affinity, yada, yada, yada. The special feature of Proviron of the DHT orals is that it really strongly binds to SHBG like Masteron. So if you have a high SHBG or it's a reservoir for estrogen or any other problems, basically always having either stinging nettle or Masteron or a little bit of Proviron will help you just rest assured that your SHBG won't be a factor. Well, the special feature of WINSTROL is that it stops cortisol from being released from the adrenal gland. So you can get drier with WINSTROL than anything else. So, if someone's coming up on a show, and if you're not a bodybuilder, you shouldn't be using steroids. If you got Anadrol for strength and size, although it's pretty weak. Anavar is a better choice, but it's more expensive, so you switch to that. You don't have the water retention issues with Anavar. On the opposite end of the spectrum, you actually shed water with WINSTROL. So, the only time you'd really use WINSTROL is right at the very end. So you'd be using an aromatase inhibitor like letrozole, which because you have less estrogen, you're going to have more painful joints. Because if assuming it worked and you actually took out the estrogen, you wouldn't be on anything that aromatases, so it's overkill. You'd be on WINSTROL as an oral because that's the best oral if you want to have the lowest cortisol. Because if you're in a calorie deficit, you're doing cardio, you're training in a low carb state, you're more likely to release cortisol to break down muscle tissue for fuel. Well, you can't with WINSTROL. Your body can't break down. Tren, of course, is a nutrient partitioner like fish oil and diverts calories you consume towards muscle synthesis, even in a calorie deficit. And it blocks the cortisol receptor. So the WINSTROL prevents cortisol from being released, but even if there was any, your Tren's blocking the cortisol receptor. Masteron or Proviron bind to the aromatase enzyme just like the aromatase inhibitor, but they also bind to SHBG. So between the aromatase enzyme being knocked out by letrozole and or competitively inhibited by Masteron, Tren, or WINSTROL or Proviron, you would use Proviron or Masteron to block the SHBG from absorbing and forming as a reservoir. Your main anabolic at this point would be the Tren, and then the WINSTROL would be there to prevent muscle wasting. So the Tren's a nutrient partitioner, so the calories you eat get turned into muscle. The mechanism that breaks down muscle tissue isn't there anymore because the WINSTROL took it out. There's nothing to convert to estrogen, but if there was, you would have letro and you'd have 2 or 3 different anabolics that would block the aromatase enzyme. And the SHBG is mopped up by either Masteron or Proviron. So a final phase of prep is usually Tren, Masteron, Masteron, and WINSTROL, or Tren, Proviron, and WINSTROL. And a lot of people are like, isn't Test Probe supposed to be in there? Test Probe supposed to be in there if you want to have a functional penis. If you don't have anyone you have to have sex with, why bother? Why spend the money? That's money that could have went towards more GH. And yeah, GH holds water, so most people pull the GH at the end, but then that's more Tren you could have bought. That's pretty much it. So that's what WINSTROL is for. Once you're willing to sacrifice the lifts, you know. In my experience, I don't really notice the ton of the joint pain unless you're using it for long periods of time or a lot of it. That's why you throw it in at the end. And I'm going to show you the chart in case you're a visual learner. At the bottom, I didn't draw the whole steroid molecule. I labeled position 1-1, just so you have a frame of reference. Normally, there'd be a double bond here at position 4 for testosterone. And then there'd be a double bond oxygen for the ketone group. And then like Anavar would have an oxygen at position 2 that makes it special. Masteron has a methyl group at position 1. The Anadrol, I think, has a ketone or double bond carbon, double bond oxygen, or single bond oxygen hydroxyl group there. The point is, this has got this ring, which is really weird. And that's what makes it special. That's what makes it a special feature of WINSTROL is it stops the cortisol from being released. So cortisol breaks down muscle tissue. Cortisol is a steroid hormone that's anti-anabolic. It's catabolic. It's the opposite. So anybody who's ever had prednisone, or they've had a girlfriend or mom who had prednisone, got super fat, that's why. It's because doctors hate you and they give you poison. And because the sicker, more needy, and more worthless you are, the more likely you are to become an addict to their pills, because it's all a business. That the medical industry in the West is the number 2 industry after military. So killing people overseas with the military, and killing people domestic with medicine from pharmaceutical companies are the 2 biggest industries in America. So WINSTROL, androgen receptor affinity, poor, anabolic rating, 250, androgenic rating, 45. You know, I basically did some math because the things are all over the place. So if you compare it to Anavar, 322 to 24, it's inferior to Anavar. It has a worse binding affinity. Obviously, it's not going to convert to DHT because it is DHT, and it can't convert to estrogen because it is DHT. So really, you wouldn't compare. Proviron's relatively weaker, but has a higher binding affinity, so it binds to SHBG better. But the best SHBG binder, other than actual DHT, is Masteron, which will probably be the next video. And then after Masteron, I'll probably do Primo and EQ. And then I'll redo this chart, so I'll actually have it listed from highest androgen affinities first. Because in my opinion, the most important thing about the drug is androgen receptor affinity. And I'll put on the progesterone and glucocorticoid receptor affinities in the chart. And I'll also put in a special feature box where I can write in the special features. Because truth is, a lot of these are shit except for their special feature. I mean, Tren is the best one, but it has the most propensity of side effects. But if you used it mathematically responsibly, like an example would be, 900 primo ends up being equivalent to like 100 tren. You know, like a 1200 EQ ends up being like 100 tren. So people would be like, I'm not going to use 3600 EQ. Are you crazy? But they're totally reasonable using 300 tren. And so they're just really bad at math, which is apparently the entire country, which is sad, but I can't pick on people because it hurts your feelings. So I can just, I guess, say that it's really sad. It's not your fault. It's America's educational system's fault for not whipping you and torturing you for getting bad grades. So, like, back on that math point, it's like I was thinking last night, I was like, do you know what would be awesome if in class the kid who got the lowest test score gets like a finger cut off? Or the other kids in class like form like a gauntlet, and that kid has to go through the gauntlet naked, and the other kids are allowed to throw rocks at him. So, like, no matter what, then people might take school seriously, because nothing motivates people anymore. And people are dumber and dumber to the point where the math part of steroid cycles is just not even considered. I'm like apparently the only person who takes the milligram multiplied by the potency and compares it to the relative equivalent of testosterone. And you have to factor in stuff like, well, trenacetate's 87% tren, 17% acetate, you know, test anathate, 70% test, 30% anathate. So you have to do the math when you're comparing one thing to the other. People don't really do that. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video, and may the force be with you.